Good morning and welcome to Bloomberg UK. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. This week we focus on the Good Friday Agreement, US President Biden in Ireland, and the economic headwinds from Brexit. But first, let's talk economics. Data out this morning showing the British economy stagnated in February as strike action crippled public services. Despite the disappointing reading, January's GDP print was revised up to 0.4% growth, reducing the risk of recession this year. Meanwhile, the IMF has again warned that the UK is set to be the worst performing economy in the G7. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, sat down with Bloomberg for an interview at the IMF spring meetings in Washington.
Well, we will do better than that.
They are wrong, the projections.
Our forecasts are significantly better than the IMF forecast. But what I should say is that last year we were the fastest growing economy in the G7.
But why is there this gap then?
Well, I think...
Where is it coming from?
You know, it's not just me. I mean, the German finance minister says he's much more optimistic about Germany's prospects. I think Janet Yellen has said the same about the United States.
So you say we will prove
we are very confident about the UK's medium and longer term prospects, but we don't pretend that we're not going through a difficult period. Like everyone, we're dealing with very high inflation, which we have to bring down. That means interest rates are higher. But you look at an economy and you say, what are the sectors that are going to make the biggest difference, that are going to shape the 21st century? And it's technology, it's life sciences, it's entertainment industries. Those are the industries where Europe has the biggest, where the UK has the biggest sector in Europe. And that gives us great hope for the future.
And if you say we will grow more than expected and we are going to beat those projections, obviously you list a number of areas where you feel you can do better than expected, but you also have a potential, trade deal with the EU. There had been tensions with the EU, potential tariffs that could come into play. That we believe it's not going to happen now with the Windsor Framework. But I do wonder, when is this going to be fully clarified for investors? Because still, it's not been fully sealed.
Well, the Windsor Framework has been agreed, and I think this is...
But in Northern Ireland, you don't have still confirmation this is going through, and they have to agree to this.
We are committed to the Windsor Framework. It will go through. What we don't have in Northern Ireland, which we are trying very hard, and indeed the President is also trying very hard to get back, is power sharing by the political parties in Northern Ireland. But in terms of the trade relationship with the EU, the trading that's going to happen between the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland, that is settled with the Windsor Framework, and that removes a major irritant in our relations with the EU.
UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt speaking to Maria Tadeo in Washington, DC. Now from Washington to Dublin. President Biden is in Ireland today after visiting Belfast, 25 years after politicians signed the landmark Good Friday Agreement. It changed the course of Northern Ireland's history, seeking to end more than 30 years of armed conflict known as the Troubles. Biden said top American companies are now ready to invest in the country. That's if its peace process endures and the power-sharing government is restored.
There are scores of major American corporations wanting to come here, wanting to invest. Many have already made homes in Northern Ireland, employing over 30,000 people. And in just the past decade, American business has generated almost $2 billion in investment in the region.
Now, Bloomberg's Louise Moon explains the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement.
25 years ago, politicians in Belfast signed the Good Friday Agreement, officially ending more than 30 years of conflict in Northern Ireland. Known as the Troubles, around 3,500 people were killed in violence including bombings and rioting. The prospect of peace and a stable, devolved government was met with overwhelming support. Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern and Bill Clinton played a key role in helping hammer out the agreement. It was based on power sharing between mostly Catholic nationalists who favoured independence and Protestant unionists wanting to preserve ties with the UK. But the journey hasn't always been smooth, and distrust remains, along with continued instances of violence.
We are dealing with a divided society. We wish it wasn't, but it is. And, you know, it's going to need tender and loving care for the long time.
The Northern Ireland Assembly at Stormont has been unable to function for 40% of its lifespan due to disagreements between the sides. Most recently, the Executive Committee hasn't met since February 2022, discourse spurred in part by post-Brexit trading arrangements. While not suspended, no major decisions can be made. But despite many continuing challenges, optimism remains.
Whatever the problems in Northern Ireland, what people should never forget, it's a world better from where it was. And if we exercise common sense and realism today, we can keep the peace intact.
That was Bloomberg's Louise Moon on the Good Friday Agreement, which will be the focus, of course, of and remains the focus of this UK show. Now, let's bring in Bloomberg's Dublin Bureau Chief, Morwenna Cunningham, who has been following President Biden's trip to the region. Morwenna, what is the significance then of this Ireland trip for the President, for the island of Ireland and for Northern Ireland?
Morning, yes. So it is a very significant time, particularly as we were just discussing. It's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which largely brought an end to violence that had been going on for 30 years in Northern Ireland. That's very important for the Republic of Ireland as well, obviously sharing a border with the North. It was one of the main signatories of the agreement, and is still, there's a North-South Joint Council, which is very important for governing general operations, that there's trade discussions, there's security discussions, and it's, you know, Biden will be discussing all of those issues, I'm sure, when he meets with the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, today. It's also significant, of course, because Biden is very proud of his Irish heritage. He yesterday visited a couple of counties where he has ancestors from, County Louth, and he went to Dundalk. And tomorrow he'll be going up to County Mayo, where he's expected to give a speech in the evening. So there's been a huge amount of jubilation, and he's called this, you know, a homecoming. He said yesterday that it feels like coming home. And he is the most Irish president by heritage since JFK. So this is a sort of special moment, I think, for him personally, as well as for Ireland as a country.
Yeah, well, they all claim that heritage, don't they? And for understandable reasons. There's a political dividend back in the US from that. What, in terms of the power sharing, there is no power sharing. Is there any chance that the president's presence can move the dial, get the DUP back in?
Well, of course, you know, it was hoped by some, I think slightly optimistically perhaps, that it would make a significant difference. It has, definitely, his message yesterday was very optimistic and very positive about the future of Northern Ireland, a promise of investment, which is something that has suffered as a result of the current political impasse. So really, it was positive, but ultimately the issues that the unionists have with the trading arrangements for Northern Ireland as a result of Brexit, and the ideological issues with treating Northern Ireland differently to the rest of the UK, and including it, say, in the EU's single market, those are much deeper-seated issues that somebody from outside, unfortunately, can only say so much. So it's nice to have the promise, and DUP leader Jeffrey Donaldson was quite positive in his comments yesterday evening about the way in which the president had conducted his speech, and appreciated the message. But the other DUP members, I mean, they're not, there doesn't seem to be any sign of them changing their position. There doesn't seem to be much hope of power sharing returning any time soon, particularly given there's local elections coming up in May, which of course they'll want to make sure that they judge the support of their base before making any decisions at this point.
OK, Bloomberg's Dublin Bureau Chief Morwenna Cunningham, thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up, a view from Belfast. We're going to discuss the significance of Joe Biden's trip to Northern Ireland, get more context and analysis. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
unfortunately, since the Good Friday Agreement over the 25 years, because there still has been political instability and the institutions of governance in Northern Ireland have only sat fitfully, I think the great promise of the economic dividend has not yet been achieved, but I do believe there is, looking forward now as we come to the final sort of element of the post-Brexit arrangements for trade, that economic dividend is there for the taking. I mean, Northern Ireland could be in a unique position of having access to the single market and to the Great Britain market, the UK market of 65 million. So that's a unique position for any piece of the territory. So I think now it's time, as we reach this final part, hopefully, of getting the institutions back up and running with the DUP, that people grasp that opportunity and that we get back to that strategic leadership that we had 25 years ago, and that people move on from fixed positions and embrace that opportunity of great prosperity and peace going forward.
That was former Irish Government Minister Liz O'Donnell, one of the negotiators of the Good Friday Agreement. Let's get more context then and bring in Professor at Queen's University Belfast, Katy Hayward, joining us from that city and the city of Belfast. Katy, thank you very much for your time. Let's get your take then on the presidential visit to Northern Ireland, to Ireland. Is there more than symbolism to this visit?
Yes, absolutely. I think President Biden's speech was a very important moment, not least because he was accompanied by the Special Economic Envoy, Joe Kennedy III, and they were really trying to emphasize the possibilities for Northern Ireland now looking forward. It was notable that he talked about the need for hard work and hope at a time when things do seem quite fragile, and also talking about economic opportunities such as might be available to Northern Ireland. And it's a really powerful message for the President of the United States to say that our futures are together, that America remains firmly committed to Northern Ireland, to the island of Ireland and the peace here, and that message of linking peace and prosperity in real terms, about talking about investment and commitments. I think that was really significant, and it goes beyond symbolism.
So an important message from the President, but it doesn't seem, at least at this stage, that he's managed to convince the DUP to return to the table, to return to government and power sharing in Stormont. What is needed to get to that point? How far are the DUP away from being convinced?
I don't think it was ever likely that the President was going to be in a position to encourage or persuade or pressurize the DUP to go back in. I think the situation for them is rather complicated. They remain very much outside of the power sharing institutions with the support of their base. And this is because they are concerned around Northern Ireland's future, its position in the United Kingdom. And this isn't something that somebody like the President could reassure them on. I think we are going to see a long, slow process of restoring confidence and commitment to the power sharing institutions from across the wider unionist community. I think, though, it was notable that the President did say, I'm not going to be it's not my place to tell you this, but it is for me important that democratic institutions function. And it was clear that he was saying you need to have those democratic institutions functioning as a determination that this is the best situation for Northern Ireland. And the DUP does have a difficult decision to make, and we will see, I think, in the coming months, if the situation stabilizes in that UK-EU relationship, perhaps that will help them move forward back into power sharing following all-party talks, I would imagine.
So, Professor, is there more that the UK, is there more that the EU and Brussels can do to convince the DUP and address some of those concerns?
I mean, we know that the UK, particularly the European Union, has said there's not much more they're going to do. So the Windsor Framework that revises the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, does go considerably far towards adjusting the protocol in response to the practical issues around the protocol that were being raised, particularly by businesses in Northern Ireland and Britain. In terms of the political dimensions, though, the questions around Northern Ireland's place in the Union, that is something that we would expect the DUP to be asking more from the UK government. This is going to be a challenge, of course, because the UK government may wish to reassure unionists, but at the same time, an important element of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is that the government who is exercising sovereign power in Northern Ireland does so with rigorous impartiality. So there is a limit as to how much the UK government can be seen to be trying to meet the needs of strong unionists. We should bear in mind, polling shows that those who are softer unionists, the more moderate unionists, particularly the Ulster Unionist Party, are supportive of the Windsor Framework and do welcome it. So it's much more the hardline strong unionists who still remain opposed, rather than the spread of unionism altogether.
And on support for that framework, for the Windsor Framework, what does the Queen's University polling tell us about how much support there is across Northern Ireland?
So we see now, we've been doing regular polls every 4 months in Queen's on the protocol. And so we can see change over time. And we definitely see that the Windsor Framework has made a difference. So there is majority support now for these arrangements, and it's a bit more of a solid basis than it was prior to the Windsor Framework. We also see a clear majority of people, around almost 7 out of 10, saying that there are potential economic benefits to come to Northern Ireland from the Windsor Framework. Most notably, we see support across the board, including from strong unionists, saying that they want to see direct engagement with Northern Ireland stakeholders on this. And I think this relates to a wider question of having one's voice heard. Northern Ireland is in a really unique position. And I think the fact that we haven't had the functioning democratic institutions for 4 out of the last 6 years does mean that people feel that their concerns and interests aren't being properly represented, particularly when we come to these really big decisions that are affecting Northern Ireland's future in that UK-EU relationship.
Okay, Professor Katy Hayward, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us with really deep insights on the politics of Northern Ireland coming from Queen's University and the city of Belfast. We appreciate it. Coming up, could the UK become stagflation nation? GDP flatlines in February. We're going to dig into the numbers and ask what it means for the Bank of England's next rate decision. The analysis next. This is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg UK. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. Now, UK GDP data out this morning showed the economy stagnating in February. According to Bloomberg Economics, the weak reading means there is still a risk the UK could enter a technical recession in the first half of this year. However, because much of the weakness, a lot of that can be attributed to strike action, it's unlikely to last. And of course, we heard from the Chancellor in Washington pushing back on the idea that the UK is going to end up in recession, or at least in as bad a place as the IMF predicts. Let's bring in Jamie Rush now, Chief Europe Economist for Bloomberg Economics. Jamie, give us the context around the GDP print then. Are we now stagflation nation? What are the months ahead looking like?
Well, yeah, as we heard, there was some strike action which kind of pushed down on activity in February. You'll get some of that activity back later on in the quarter. Big picture is like first quarter, GDP is going to be flattish. Second quarter, probably a contraction because I don't know what you'll be doing on May the 8th, but I'm going to be in my garden barbecuing and everyone's going to be on bank holiday. So
I hope to be invited to that, Jamie.
Of course, Tom.
That now.
Yeah. So that's going to, I mean,
so that's the coronation.
Yeah, exactly. Coronation weekend. There's going to be, there's going to be a lull in activity as a result of that. So that's kind of, there's a couple of things pushing down. It's going to mean that underlying growth is actually a bit stronger than that. But the economy is going to be going slow for the rest of the year. And why? It's because monetary policy is going to be squeezing it.
So does that give the opportunity, the BOE, the opportunity to stand pat, to hold off? The economy is slowing. You're seeing there's some lines crossing about 30 minutes ago in terms of the number of defaults. Loan defaults are ticking up. The access to mortgages are becoming more difficult. They can stand pat, can't they? It would be an argument.
So markets expect them to hike. But I think over the coming weeks, we will see a bit more evidence on slowing pay gains in the labour market. We are seeing tightening of financial conditions. That's going to weigh on the economy beyond what the Bank of England does. So I think there is a strong case that the Bank of England should just stay on hold now, and that's what we're forecasting.
OK, we've been talking, of course, and focused a lot on what's happening in Northern Ireland, given the President's visit to Northern Ireland now, the island of Ireland, or Dublin, I should say. And in terms of the potential dividend, the economic dividend for Northern Ireland from Brexit, and there's still a lot of ifs and buts in terms of power sharing and Stormont and the Assembly, and of course the Windsor Framework. But what is your assessment of the potential upside for that part of the UK economy?
Well, I mean, first, Northern Ireland's 2% of UK GDP, so it's a very small part of the overall picture. So it's not going to, the Windsor Framework doesn't change the overall aggregates for the UK. For Northern Ireland, I mean, of course, it's going to be better than the arrangement that was there to begin with. I'd expect a modest boost. But Northern Ireland has long-standing economic problems which need to be addressed, and they are bigger than Brexit. They are weak productivity.
OK, so weak productivity is still something that's going to be solved. And the US President talked about the potential for billions of dollars of US investment coming through. Is he just talking shop there, or is that real? To what extent could that foreign investment be a catalyst for that part of the UK as well?
Well, we heard from your guest earlier about the political instability that's sort of been in place in Northern Ireland for so long. Yeah. I mean, having a functioning government, of course, is an important part, and that's one of the big things that will drive investment decisions. We've seen that with Brexit in the wider UK. You need the political stability for foreign direct investment to happen. So I think that moving beyond the current deadlock in Parliament would be an important step. OK, Jamie Rush, always appreciate it. Thank you for the analysis. Chief Europe economist for Bloomberg Economics on the potential economic implications for Northern Ireland, and of course assessing that latest GDP print for the broader UK. Be sure to subscribe to Bloomberg's In the City podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Thursday. You're looking across the UK markets now, range-bound, the FTSE 100 at 7,821. The futures in the US still pointed to gains of a little over 0.1%. Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition continues in the next hour with Matt Miller in New York and Anna Edwards here in London. This is Bloomberg.